Hello and welcome back to today's episode of Antiformal. Today, as I am filming this, is Halloween, so I hope that you all have a great time celebrating that. Today I'm going to be talking about the university's freshman field trip for geology students, which is a special trip that the first year students will go on after the end of the year, so right after finals week. Just to go out to field camp, go explore, go see some really cool geology things, and to make connections with their fellow classmates. But first, a very spooky mineral of the week. Probably know about it, probably have seen it, might even have some. Today we are talking about pyrite. So pyrite is a iron sulfide, so it is iron sulfide, and it's commonly known as fool's gold, and that's because it is a shiny gold metal. So if you were digging in the ground and you found something like this, you might say, I just found gold, and you would think you were very rich, and you would probably be wrong. So it really likes to form these very nice cubes. So this is a near perfect cube that just formed naturally in the ground because of just the way it's structured, the way the chemicals are structured. But it also, you don't usually get big perfect cubes like this. You will usually get a bunch of really small cubes or crystals clustered together like this. And you might even find some pieces that have other elements in it. So this one actually is a combined piece of pyrite and galena. So galena is lead sulfide. So pyrite is a very common ore for iron. So it's somewhat common, and so you can dig it out in the ground in huge quantities, and then you can process it to get your pure iron for different sorts of, building materials, etc. The freshman field trip here at OU is for all of the first year students, so all the students who are just entering the college, so typically freshmen, but if you transfer in late, you might still be eligible to go on it. So this year we went with Gail Holloway and Dr. Barry Weaver and Dr. Lynn Sorrigan. And so there were 8 students and then 2 TAs. And so we left the day after finals week ended. So that Saturday we all loaded up in the vans at 7 in the morning, and we all drove out. And our first stop was in Raton, New Mexico, where we were going to see the KT boundary. The KT boundary is the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Tertiary periods. So the Cenozoic era. So it's the divide that you find between when the dinosaurs died. So it's a huge feature formed from a massive asteroid impact. Except sadly the trail was closed, and so we did not actually get to go see it, but we did get to go right up to the gate that was closed, and we all still had a lot of fun climbing around looking at some rocks. There was a bunch of coal that was coming right out of the ground, so that was really cool to see just naturally forming coal. And then we got back in the car and we drove up to Canyon City, where our field camp is located. Canyon City is a city in central Colorado, and so it has some really fun geologic features. So the first thing we did was we got to our field camp, and it was pretty late, so we all had dinner and we talked a little bit. Some of us went for a short hike up to the top, and then the next morning we got up early and we hiked all the way up to the top of the mountain, which was probably a couple thousand feet above the field camp. So it was a little bit strenuous, but the views were gorgeous. You could see all of Canyon City, basically, and it was really neat. And so some of the things that we also talked about were the geology of the area. So field camp was built on top of some very special rocks known as a migmatite formation, which is when you have these very high-grade metamorphic rocks, in this case a schist, and then you get so much pressure that it starts to melt, but it doesn't melt all the way, and so you end up with bands of schist and granite because it melted into magma, sort of, but not all of it did. So it was very pretty, and it was a really cool thing to get to see because they're not all that common, just because of a lot of times when you have that sort of pressure that would melt a rock, it would just melt the whole thing. And so, but you had these beautiful striated formations. And then we went to go check out more places in Canyon City. And so we went up to Skyline Drive, which was like a Cretaceous age formation where we got to see some dinosaur tracks and some other cool like sedimentary rocks. So that was a lot of fun climbing around on those rocks, seeing huge footprints that were probably from some sort of ankylosaurid, I believe. And then we went to Tunnel Drive, which was a huge like pass that was cut through a mountain. And so it was a granite mountain, but it had these huge basaltic dikes. So you had a different kind of rock that came through and cut through and cooled very, very quickly. And so you would have these huge cut throughs. And so that was really fun. And so these were really cool. So even from that tunnel drive, you would look over the Arkansas River, which has headwaters in Colorado, and it passes through Canyon City in the Royal Gorge area, which we did not get to actually go to, but it's supposed to be beautiful. And so after that, we go back to the field camp, and we spend the night, we have dinner. And then the next day, we all went to fluorescent fossil beds in another part of Colorado, which is a national park where you have these massive tree stumps, fossil tree stumps, and you have some gorgeous fossils that come out of there. But first, we made some stops at some different lava flow areas, so you could see rhyolites and all these igneous materials, basalts, etc. And so the reason that you have all these massive, massive tree stumps, so these were redwoods. So at one point it was warm enough that you had redwoods living in Colorado. And so they lived in this lake area, and there were volcanoes, and so the volcanoes came through, and it was such a huge eruption that it knocked over all these trees and leaving only the stumps, which became petrified. And so it also preserved these beautiful fossils because it was in a lake, and so you have very, very fine, flat layers of sediment, and then you top it with the magma, and it really locks it in, and it preserves it very well, and it makes it so that you can't really get anything in to degrade it, because obviously when you have a fossil, one of the first things that's one of the most dangerous parts is that things often will break down and go away before they get a chance to fossilize. And so having this lava flow actually sort of stopped that from happening, because you couldn't get this sort of degradation. So that was a really cool experience. We got to go out there, go hiking. It was actually kind of rainy, so it was a little bit chilly, but it was still really neat to go hike out and see these stumps that were like 35 million years old, and they were massive because they were redwoods. And so it was a really neat experience to go see like how they were excavating them slowly. And then we got back in the car and we drove back, and then the next day we started going to Great Sand Dunes, which is another national park in Colorado, which is just a giant field of sand dunes, and it's trapped between like two mountain ranges. So that's how you get all this weathering sediment that sort of gets trapped in between the two. And they were massive. We didn't even have time to make it to the top because they were so big, but we got to go go play around on that, go do a little bit of sledding, but we didn't get our sled waxed, so it was not very easy to sled, but it was really interesting, and we got to go see like some of the different formations out there, some cool rocks that you find out there. It's a really, really interesting area also. It's sort of also separated by like a creek that sort of holds it in. So it's sort of surrounded on all sides by different formations that keep it from being able to just all blow away. And then actually just about like 5 miles away from Great Sand Dunes, we got to go on a hike to Zapata Falls, which is a glacier. So it's a very small glacier in like a cave, and it was really cool. But I remember being on the hike up there, and we're walking, and it's really difficult, and we're all tired because we've been out in the sun all day already. And then the lady comes by and she's on the way back and she says, "Don't worry, the air conditioning's on up there." And I remember thinking that it must have just been something you say, you know, when you see someone on a difficult hike and you're on the way back, you're just like, you can do it. But we get up there and it becomes noticeably cooler instantly, because you have this waterfall and the glacier, so you have all this really cool water in the air, and it really cools it down. Like, I feel like it was practically a 15-degree drop that I felt. I didn't have a thermometer with me, but that's what it felt like. And so it was really cool to get to go in there in the cave and go see like a glacier like up really close. It was a very small glacier, but you could still see all the places that you even had, like all the places that rocks had been pushed out to when you'd had a much bigger glacier. And so it was a really interesting experience to go see that. I remember being in like the cave area, and you're walking across this creek, but it's like solid ice on top. And so and it's like several inches thick, so you're totally safe, you're totally fine. And it was actually pretty chilly in that cave, even though it was so hot out, because you had less light and you had all this ice and all this really cold water. And so after we went back, the next day we went out to Garden of the Gods. But first we did a lot of stops like along the side of the road. So this trip we actually did a lot of stops on the side of the road just to look at all these formations that were like in road cuts, because that's a really good way to see some of those rocks is just right there when you're driving past them. And so it felt a little silly having like 12 of us all piling out looking at rocks on the side of the road. But it was really interesting to get to see all these things up close and the way that they've been cut through, and so you really got to see like the whole face and all the layers and formations and stuff. The Fountain Formation is from the Paleozoic, so it's from around the Pennsylvanian, and it's what Garden of the Gods was created from. And so Garden of the Gods, if you've ever been there or seen pictures, is all these huge red like sandstone formations. And so it's really interesting to get to see some of the geology of that, like just in normal layering, before we went in and saw like the different, so it was really cool to get to go see. The Fountain Formation is a Pennsylvanian age formation that was mostly like conglomerate and sandstone, and so we got to go see it up close first and just the normal layering patterns and stuff, before we got to go and see like some of the huge formations that were a lot less common and stuff. So like the Kissing Camels rocks, the like Balancing rock, and so it was really cool to get to find out ahead of time. And then we got to go see like all these formations, and it actually rained while we were out there too, so that was kind of interesting. Go see all these things. There are some really like very tame mule deer in the park that they're so used to being around people that they're very calm. It was really cool. And then we went just a few miles away and we went to a place called Red Rock Canyon Park, and so it was some really pretty formations of this red fountain formation rock again. And then there was actually part of it that was an old quarry, and so we got to go see all these like cuts of rock where you have these massive chunks being taken away, and you can just see all these like steps along the wall, and it was really interesting. Beautiful hike. And then so the day after that we go out to the Molly Kathleen gold mine, which it used to be a functioning gold mine for a really long time, and then they stopped producing gold out of it, but they actually kept it going, kept it open as a place to go take tours. And so you get in this old mining elevator and you go down 1,000 feet, so you're really far underground. And it's really interesting to go see like all the places. So they were mining the gold out of this purple fluorite, basically. You had these teeny tiny amounts, and so you dig out this fluorite, but it was long ago, so they were actually using like dynamite, and like they had donkeys down there and all these things. So it was really interesting to see the way that they carved out these massive tunnels with just like dynamite, and even before they had donkeys, they were just like hauling this rock away themselves. And so you had, and all the advancements, so like initially you just have like people like you dig a hole, you make a tiny hole, You put one stick of dynamite in, and then you walk away. And so you eventually get all these advancements in it, so they're doing pretty well. But it was really interesting to get to go see and go learn about like some of the history of the devices that they made. All this kind of stuff was really, really cool. It's a little scary being that far underground because the only way back is an hour-and-a-half climb of some ladders, which that's not really what I want for my trip. After that, we went to a mining museum to go learn about some like more history of the area, history of like the towns that had popped up from all this gold mining in the area, and go learn about some of the people, some of the technology, and just like also they had some stuff about like the wildlife of the area. So after that, we go to see like an open pit mine that they are working on today. So like the modern methods that will be used for mining. So that was really interesting. Definitely a big change from what they were doing with these holes, these tunnel systems underground, which they have like miles and miles under the ground, and they're all connected, but they're all owned by different people. And so you basically, if you go too far, you're accidentally mining in someone else's territory, and that's not good because you can't steal their gold. Our last day on the way home, we stopped at Capulin Volcano National Monument, and we got to go see this, which is about 60,000 years old. It's a cinder cone. So it's not currently active, but I guess it's young enough that it technically could be one day if anything were to happen under there, but it's currently inactive. And so a cinder cone is essentially, it's a volcano, but it's made up of like loose bits of pyroclastic material, so tuff, scoria, pumice, all these little bits though. So it's actually a little bit unstable as volcanoes go, just because it's a little bit loose in there, but it's sturdy enough that they let you drive to the top, so it wasn't like a huge issue. We actually got to even go down into like the crater to go see like the center and see all these huge like chunks of volcanic rock. And then we went home. So all in all, it was a really interesting, really cool trip to go on. I definitely got to know a lot of the people in the program better. So we were all staying in cabins, so I really got to know the girls I was with, Jayla and Piper. I think we're a lot closer now. In the evening, we would even get to go out and sort of like play around, explore field camp ourselves a little bit. So get to go on some short hikes. I remember going out and seeing some like deer bones in a creek. But yeah, I also got to know some of the professors a lot better, so making those kind of unique connections. And I also learned a ton about the geology of like the area, because whatever you learn in class is really great, but it doesn't really make as much sense until you actually get to go and see it in the field. And so they had these big booklets that we had, so like every stop we would read about it first, and then we'd get to go and actually see it. And so it's really interesting to get to go see these features like out in the real world and see how they actually look, how they actually form. And a lot of it again was looking at road cuts, even going to see these places where we have these granites. I remember a granite wall that had all this mica just spilling right out of it. We're all like filling our pockets with mica because what can they do? It's the side of the road. Now, the summer after your junior year, you take a course called field geology, and so you actually go out there. You stay for 6 weeks, and you go to different areas. You do some camping. You do some like work around the area just to go find different things, go look at different features. But it's very much hands-on. And after your junior year, you've learned a lot of things about geology. So it's definitely even more amazing to get to go see those things in person and actually do a lot more like hands-on work, because this is like a graded course, not just a field trip where you go for a week and you go play around in some sand dunes and stuff. But yeah, I think it definitely cemented that this is something that I really want to do, that I really love geology, I love paleontology, and I want to keep going. I want to find out more. So definitely, if you're in geology and you have this opportunity, you should absolutely take it. was probably one of the coolest experiences I've had so far in college. So our next meeting is going to be November 9th, 6 p.m., 1446 as usual. And then November 16th, 9 to 5, we have the mineral auction. So come see us, come buy some things that are buy it now, come see what we have for auction, come just say hi even. Have a great Halloween, have a great November, and I will see you in about a month. Thank you so much.